All right, guys, module number 4, let's get into functions. So as you guys have been in your Python journey for a couple days now, or maybe a couple weeks, depending on how long you're taking to watch this course, today we're going to be understanding functions and arguments. Congratulations, you're about to level up your programming skills with functions. One of the main fundamentals of programming, anyone who writes code is going to know how to write a function and how to utilize them. Functions are reusable blocks of code that makes your program more organized, efficient, and modular. Today, we'll learn how to define functions with various parameters and how to call them to perform specific tasks, and include all of the different fundamental key steps and key learning points that we've already learned within Python. Understanding function arguments will empower your creative flexibility and make your code versatile, making your programs more robust and maintainable. So they're going to take all of the concepts that we've already learned, like for loops, while loops, if statements, and take all the data structures and data types that we've learned and put them all into place. We're going to be utilizing functions to create amazing notebooks of Python code. So stay tuned for this lesson, and let's get into the PowerPoint for today. We're going to be learning about what functions are and how they work inside of Python. Okay, welcome back, students. We are here with the module number 4, functions lesson for Python today. As always, I'm Matthew Wynn with FAU and the Exec Ed program in the Python Bootcamp. Today's agenda, we're going to be learning about functions, how to write functions, applications to all the concepts we're going to be learning about functions today in this lesson. It's going to be about 20-25 minutes long, as always. And as always, I had to include a meme here. If you guys have seen this movie, the Spider-Man movies are quite funny. Where am I going wrong with this Python function? And then the guy decides to laugh, and then we get the guy crying. Don't worry, we're going to be utilizing some good practices so you don't have much errors in your Python function. And as you guys can see, there's the meme there. I'm going to move my screen over for a second so you guys can see it. But let's hop into the PowerPoint. So the next part is always, I'm going to be using Windows for today. We'll be working on our Jupyter Notebook. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me at matthewNGUYE2023@fau.edu. And let's get into the lesson for today. So functions, what is a function? So I want to show this diagram first on this slide before I have any of the bullet points. But essentially, this is a very, very good overview of what a function is and what it does. And it allows you to kind of visualize each aspect of the function inside of Python. So let's get started with our specific points. So in Python, a function is a named block of code that performs a specific task. Functions allow you to make code reusable, and it allows you to manage your different loops, if statements, and other blocks of code. So I always think of a function as a machine. So a function is designed to perform a specific task. So you're able to kind of section out your specific code within Python and your notebooks so you can utilize this repetitively, and you can utilize this to perform specific tasks over and over again. So essentially, we can think of the function as a machine. So the function is going to have things like arguments, which we can think of like the raw materials, whatever we're feeding into the function. So in essence, the function is going to have something called arguments, and you're going to feed these arguments into the parameters of the function that you're going to define. So that might be a tricky concept to grasp at first, but think about the parameters being what you're defining as your input for the function, and then your arguments are going to be the values that you assign to those parameters. So here you see there's 2 parameters in this define add function, and I'll open up the next part of the slide. So you can pass data into a function through its parameters, and then the positional arguments are going to must match the order in which the parameters are listed. So if you are giving a value to this X parameter from an argument as 1, and you're giving this value as 2, then it's going to utilize X as 1 and Y as 2. And you can also specify your arguments with keyword arguments. We'll get into that a little bit later. So you can think about the function body, which is all the code inside of it, kind of like an assembly line. So you're going to have that specific part of the code where your magic will happen. This is where it's going to process whatever arguments you feed the function. In this case, it's adding X and Y, and then it's going to return Z. So what you can think of the return values as is the finished product. So in this case, we're returning the variable z, which is just x plus y. And as always, you must call the function. So once you have the function defined, you'll have another block of code that has the function name, and you'll feed it the arguments you want to feed it. So I don't have to feed it 1 and 2 in this case. I can feed it whatever numbers I want, and you'll be able to get the output of that specific function. Remember, the function always starts with the def keyword to define the function, and it has a colon after the parentheses with the arguments in it. So it goes def as the keyword to signify that it's a function, the function name, which could be whatever you want to name it, and then it's going to be a colon or parenthesis. It's going to be parentheses with your arguments inside of it, and then a colon to end it, and then inside the function block. And that's pretty much it for the basics of a function. So let's take a look at this example here. We have the def add function. Again, we have x and y. So we're going to just return x plus y. In this case, we're going to call the function here with add and then 3 and 4. So we'll get 7 as the output. So if you look at the bullet points I have listed here, we're going to define the function again by using the def keyword, and then we're going to have our function name. In this case, it's add. So this line defines the function, and it defines the parameters that we're going to feed into the function. The code block inside of this function, return x plus y, is going to allow us to run this specific block of code whenever we call the function. And then we're going to call the function in line number 3 where we have add, and then feed it those two parameters, x and y, with the arguments of 3 and 4. In this case, we're calling the function or invoking the function in line number 3, and then when we run that block of code, we will get the value of 7. So I wanted to also add some nuances to learning about a function. In this case, we can assign y in this case to a value of 1, and that is considered a default parameter. So for best practice, if you want to have a default parameter or an optional parameter, you want to make sure it comes after the required parameters in this case. So in this case, if we have this block of code that says def add x and then y equals 1, if we return x plus y, in this case we have 3 and 5, so it will return 3 plus 5. If we only give it 3 in this case, then it will do 3 plus 1 because we have already predefined this default parameter as y equals 1. The next case I want to look at is applying the none value to y. So in this case, we have the same function here. And now when we apply the y to the none as a default parameter, if there is no argument for y, then the value of none is automatically going to be applied. So in this case, in this function, we're saying if y is equal to none, then we're just going to return x. Else, so if y is defined as something else, then we'll return x plus y. In this case, if we do add 3 in this case, it's just going to return 3. But if we were to do comma another argument in this case, let's say we do 4, then it will return 7 because it will run this else block. So those are just some nuances to think of for the basics of learning about functions. Let's look at the next example here. In this example, we have a star inside of the args parameter that we're feeding this function. So in this function, we're defining the function as add again. So the function is going to be called add. We're going to return the sum of the args. So a sum is a built-in function into Python, just like the print. So in this case, if we print the function add and we feed it these arguments, 1, 2, 3, and 4, what that star is going to do inside of the function parameter, it's going to make a tuple, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we can add any amount of arguments in this case. So if we had 1 through 10, it will sum 1 through 10. In this case, we only have 1 through 4, so it's only adding 1 through 4. If we just had 1 in this case, it'll just add 1. This is used so you're able to feed your function a flexible amount of arguments, so that no matter how long the length of arguments is, you can always apply that to your function. So just keep that in mind. Now, if we have 2 asterisks, this is where it gets a little bit wonky, but don't worry, we're going to go over it in the Jupyter Notebook so it makes a little bit more sense. If we have 2 stars, what we're going to be doing here is basically we're going to be allowing Python to have some keyword arguments. Keyword arguments are just defining the specific arguments you're feeding in Python with some values. So in this case, we are calling the function greet with the 2 arguments, name and age. In this case, we have a dictionary that will be output by using the 2 stars. So if you use the 2 stars, the output of your function will be a dictionary. So in this case, we're saying for key value in keyword arguments dot items, we're taking the key and the value and we're printing them. This might look a little foreign to you. We're going to be going over what this is next, and that's called an F string. It's basically a cleaner way to print out your code. So we're stepping it up a notch, but don't worry, everything is going to make sense. So just remember, the star will return a tuple as the arguments, and a double star or double asterisk will. All right, so these are a lot of things to consider within using functions in Python on a basic level. We want to make sure that we understand variable scope. So if you declare a variable inside of a function, that variable will only be local to that specific function. So if you define a variable in a function and try to call it outside of the function, it will not work. That's the difference between global and local variables. Just keep that in mind. We want to make sure that the function has a purpose. If it's doing a bunch of different things, it might be easier to have multiple functions and then call a function inside of a function if we want something else to be applied. That's another concept that we're going to get into on a basic level in this bootcamp. So just remember, you can call specific functions within another function, just like you can call loops within another loops. We want to make sure we name our functions with some sort of descriptive name that actually tells us what we're going to want to do. So if we want to add numbers, maybe we call the function add. F strings, like we showed in the slide before, is a better way to print specific values that are going to require us to have specific variables in them. So before, we were just using the quotation marks to signify strings when doing print statements in Python. By using this F string, we're able to actually throw variables and even arguments inside of these brackets so that it prints everything. So in this case, it'll print hello, and then whatever's inside this world argument or variable, and then it will print that as a string. So sounds complicated, but in practice, I promise you it'll be a little bit easier. So in this case, if we want to return a specific value for our function, we want to make sure we use the return keyword and not the print function. So if we want to just print things to the output of the cell, we can use the print. But if we want to return the values to actually keep within our code block, then we want to use the return keyword. Doc strings are basically comments for functions. They're a little bit easier and cleaner to use. We'll get into that too. You basically just define doc strings, which are just, like I said, comments for your functions, just describing what it actually does. You'll call 3 quotation marks, you'll write what you need to write, then 3 more quotation marks to close that doc string out. All right, testing. So you want to make sure you test your functions, make sure that they're working well, and make sure that they're robust enough to handle whatever arguments or whatever functionality that you want them to actually do inside of Python. And next, you want to make sure that you keep the length of your functions pretty short. You don't want to have a giant function. It's probably better that you split these functions up into other functions and then feed them into, let's say, another function, or have a function that calls other functions without having, 100 lines of code that's doing a specific function. And that's pretty much it for this. So let's hop into the Jupyter Notebook and let's get started. All right, guys, we are back in the Jupyter Notebook. Let's go over some of the functions we had in our Python PowerPoint presentation, and let's go line by line. So if we decide to run this first simple function, the def add function, so the add function, we're going to get number 7. Now, I wanted to show you guys a very important principle that is found within functions. So if we have this def function, this add function that's returning x plus y, we can actually save this as a variable. So let's save this as result equals add 3 and 4. Let's take this out, and then we print 5 plus result. We'll get the number 12, right? Because we're getting 7 here and we're adding 5. However, if we decide to just print x plus y in this case, and we call the add function and do 3 and 4, we're going to get that 7 again. However, if we try to save add in this case into result, and we try to print result plus 5, we're going to get an error. The reason is, if we try to print result in this case, because we use the print statement in this function, we're going to get none. We're going to get none because this variable is not being saved as the number 7. So if we allow that to happen, if we try to use this function to save a value in our code, it's not going to work. So that's why it is always recommended that you use the return keyword so that you return the specific value that you want from your function. All right, let's take a look at the second block of code. That is the add function with the y equals 1 as the default parameter in this case. So let's run this with just the number 3. So we'll click run and we're going to get 4 because y will automatically be assigned to 1 if we don't feed it another argument. Let's say we do 4 in this case. Click run. We'll get 7. If we change this to 5, we'll get 9. So as you guys can see, we're able to actually override what the parameter that is defined here as 1 with whatever we decide to put in as the argument here. Let's move on to the next block of code. So it's the same thing here, except we're defining y is equal to none. So if we run this block of code, we're only going to get 3. However, if we feed it another number, let's say 10, and we run this, it's going to give us 13. The reason is because we have this else clause that's returning x plus y. And in this case, if y is equal to none, and the only way that y is going to be none is if we do not add a parameter here, since we are predefining y as none up top in the function. So that is that. So in this case, we have a function that says, that's called add, and we're using the star for the keyword argument. We're using the star and then the args for our parameters for this case. So in this case, we have a tuple of numbers that we want to feed into our args here for our argument. Now, the reason we add this star here is so we can make this dynamic. So this outputs 10. Now, if we were to add 5 and 10 to this, it's going to output 25 because it allows us to be flexible with the amount of arguments that we feed it, because it creates the tuple that we feed it, creates into a list. So let's click run. So this is super useful in the cases that you want to have multiple arguments in your function that is not predefined. So it makes it dynamic that we can feed it multiple arguments in this case, and it'll always work within that function. All right, next guys, let's take a look at this greet function. So we have greet here, we have the 2 stars here. So like in the PowerPoint, we know that if we feed it a key value pair, in this case, these are considered keyword arguments. So we're feeding it that it's the name as the key and the value is John. The age is 20. The age is the key here, and the value is 25. So it's saying that with these 2 stars, it's going to output a dictionary. So we can say for key value in keyword arguments dot items. So it's getting the items of this dictionary. As you remember, the items is a method that we can run on dictionaries. It's basically just printing each key and value. And this is the F string in this case. So the F string allows us to dynamically write strings while inputting specific values in this function. So I can also write this like this. I can write key, comma, this, comma, colon, and then value, and it should print the same thing. Let's run it. So it prints it the same thing here. But as you guys know, as I mentioned earlier, the F strings in this case are a lot easier and cleaner. So we'll end up using that more often in Python. Now I just deleted this out. So, all right, so that's back in there. So that's the basics of functions here, guys. If you guys take a look at all these lines of code, that's going to be really what you're going to be able to get out of the basic components of functions. And now let's work on building on top of that. So in this case, we have a list of different sales here, and we want to write a function to calculate the commission rate of the sales. So in this case, we're writing a function called calculate commissions, and our argument is going to be sales in this case. So we're going to be feeding it a list in this case, which is going to be the list of the sales that we have. We're going to list the variable that's going to be local to this function as commission rate. And I want to hit on the point of local versus global variables. So if I try to print the commission rate outside of the function, let's comment this out. Let's run this function now and see if we get the commission rate. We get a commission rate is not defined. And the reason for that is because inside of this function, we list this variable, but on the outside of the function, we are unable to use this variable because it's only in this function. That's the difference between global and local scope. So let me delete this and uncomment all these things out. So let's run through this function here. So we're defining the function name by calculate commissions, and we're feeding it the argument for sales. Again, we have that commission rate saved as a variable, and we have that commissions list as an empty list. So we're saying for sale in the sales, and we're feeding it the sales list up here. We're going to take the commission will be the sales times the commission rate, and the commissions dot append, we're going to append that commission. So we're getting the commission for each sale. So 10,000 or 100,000 is going to flow through here in this function. We're going to multiply it by 0.5, and we're going to append that number to the list here. And then we're going to do it again for the 200,000 and then the 150,000. So let's run this by running the commissions that we got from this specific function. So we'll run this. So we're saying the commissions for the agent are 5,000, 10,000, and 7,500. The reason is because once we end this function, we are storing commissions in another variable. And as you guys can see, we have two variable names here. We have commissions and we have commissions. This commissions is going to be a global variable. So it's probably better that we name this variable commissions list. We'll do commissions list here. So let's run this again, and we'll get that. A little bit cleaner since we don't have two of the same variable names. But again, the variables found within this function, calculate commissions, are going to be local to that specific function itself. So that's a simple way to calculate commissions in a function in Python. I hope that case was useful. Now let's take a look at two example exercises so we can really hone down on our skills with functions. Alrighty, so let's knock out this first example. Let's add a block by clicking B on here. So we want to define a function that calculates the area of a rectangle. The function should take two parameters, length and breadth. If only one value is provided when calling the function, assume it's a square and calculate the area accordingly. And if not, we will calculate the area of the rectangle. So let's do it. So as you guys know, the rectangle might have a longer width than the actual length. In this case, we're going to provide that as the breadth. So if the length and the width are the same, it's going to be a square. And if the length and width are different, it'll be a rectangle. So how would we do this? So let's define a function by saying def, let's say area, and let's feed it two arguments. We'll say the first one's going to be the length, and the next one's going to be the breadth. And we'll set the breadth equal to none in this case. We'll close out with a colon. So inside of this function, we'll write an if statement. So we'll say if the breadth is none, then we will multiply length by the length, and we're going to return that. And then else we'll return the length times the breadth. Alrighty, now let's call the function area. Let's feed it just one. So let's click run. We'll get 25 because we know that's a square if we only have the same length and width. Now let's change this to 5 and 10. Now we know that we have two different lengths. We have a length and we have a breadth or a width. We'll click run, and we get 50. So basically what it's doing is it's taking in that default parameter and it's checking for it. So if we have two arguments for this function, it's going to ignore this default parameter. Now, if we only have one, so let's take this out. If we only have one, then it's going to see that the second argument in the function is equal to none. So it will return only the length times the length. So let's run this and we get 100. Simple enough, easy, but a very useful exercise when trying to hone down your skills with learning functions. All right, the second exercise, guys. So we have a shopping cart here, and we want to calculate the total customer's shopping cart by utilizing a function here, and we're giving this shopping cart as a dictionary. So let's copy this in, and let's define that as a variable in here. So we have the shopping cart as a list of dictionaries. So we have a list here of dictionaries. So let's do def. Let's define this as shopping cart total, and let's feed it a parameter here, and let's just say shopping cart is going to be our argument here. So let's say the total is going to start out at 0. What we want to do is we want to say for the item in our shopping cart, we want to return, in this case, in this loop, the total will now plus equal to the item at the key price times the item at the key quantity. And what we want to do from here is we want to return the total. So remember to back out that indentation since we are getting out of the loop. So let's run through this. We have our function name here. We're feeding it the shopping cart as the argument. We're going to have a variable as the total at 0. So we're saying for item in shopping cart, we are now updating that total variable here. So we're saying the total is now equal to the item in the list. So the item is going to be the individual dictionaries in this case. So we're going to say the item at the price key times the item at the quantity key. So it's going to take those two values, multiply them together. In the first case, it'll be 20 times 2, so it'll be 40. So the total will be 40. Now, let me show you a quick example on how this might work so you guys can understand it. I'm going to cut this out for now, and I'm just going to close this. So let's return the total here. Let's print the shopping cart total function and feed it the shopping cart list as we define here. Now let's click run. Forgot to add a colon here. Very easy mistake. Very easy mistake. Made two easy mistakes. Let's run this now. So we get 40. As another way of keeping it 100 with you guys, sometimes you make mistakes when writing specific variable names, and this might be something to take down as a note. In other Python IDEs, you're able to actually identify your variables while you type. Let's click run. We'll get 40 in this case, so I'm going to undo all of this out. Go back to the function itself, and we're going to return that total. So as you guys saw, we got that first item. Now we added all the items back into that list. So let's get back out of here and let's print the function name, and let's call, in this case, shopping cart. Now let's run this. Now we get 105 because it's going through each item in this list. It's multiplying the price and the quantity within that dictionary inside of the item and getting the total. So it might seem a little complicated. Take some time to review this code for this specific question. But once you get the hang of it, it'll work out extremely well. The last point I wanted to hit on is I can call this whatever I want. I can call this things in this case and just print things and click run, and I'll get that same number. This does not have to match the argument that you have within this function. It just happens to be that I named the list the same name as the argument in this case, which might be a good idea to do if you have variables that are constantly changing. You want to make sure you keep everything cohesive and coherent inside of Python. But that's going to be it for this video on functions, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned a ton. This is a very long and comprehensive video, but very important you go over all the topics we learned in this video. It's going to be probably the most important module in this specific Python bootcamp. Next, we're going to move on to working with files, and then finally, we're going to be moving on to the different libraries we have in Python, and then potentially an extra module for you guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Take care and have a great day. I'll see you on the next video.